I want to talk today about thinking and about some of the mental traps that we have when thinking. And so Aslak and Seb said, do you want to come and speak at our 10th anniversary CukenFest? And I said, yeah, I'm going to talk, I'll give you my thinking talk. And they said, you've got half an hour. So I said, I'll give you the condensed version of my thinking talk. And then, in fact, either last night or possibly first thing this morning, I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I want to completely rework that talk to fit this scenario, to fit this context. So I did. So this morning, I rewrote my talk, and here we go. So this starts with a chap called Eliyahu Goldratt. Sadly died a few years ago. He's I think he was one of the great thinkers, the great management thinkers of the 20th century, early 21st century. He's a physicist, which is kind of cool. So he sees all these really complicated things, and instead of going, complicated things, there's consulting money to be made here, he says, complicated things, probably some pretty simple rules underneath them. Because if you look at the universe, pretty complicated place, some fairly simple rules underneath it. And if you look at the arc of science over time, particularly the arc of physics over time, what happens is we get successively more elegant understandings that have successively fewer parts. So we thought electricity and magnetism were different things, and then they collapsed into the same thing. And that was electromagnetism. And this happens again and again in history. So he's a physicist, and he looks at the world through physicists' eyes. And back in 1984, he wrote a rather wonderful book called The Goal. Who's read The Goal? Let's just see. I can see a few hands up. Fantastic. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It had a bit of a problem getting published because it's a novel that's a management book. So it's a parable. It's a kind of fable. And it's the story about this chap, Alex, who works in a factory. And the factory's going down the tubes, and they're going to shut it down. He's got 30 days to save the world. And he meets an old school teacher called Jonah. And Jonah's kind of like this guru-type character who doesn't tell him the answers. He just asks him really challenging questions. And Alex goes off and noodles over these questions. And it's okay. It all works out in the end, and the dog doesn't die, so it's all fine. Really, but I found it quite literally a life-changing book. It really does mess with how you view the world, and particularly your professional world, how you view that. About 20-something years later, he then recorded a series of talks called Beyond the Goal. And this is a strapline, everything I've learned since publishing The Goal. So he's been a consultant for the intervening couple of decades, and these are the things that he's seen. Now, pro tip, last summer, The Goal was published as a graphic novel, and it was illustrated by like a Marvel cartoonist or something. They got like really good people on it. And the Beyond the Goal is audio, so you don't even need to be able to read, okay, to consume these. Go and have a look at these. But I was really struck with Beyond the Goal in particular. So it's a series of about 8 lectures. And in the first lecture, the first talk, Goldratt says, he talks about technology. And he says, the thing is, technology is useful, he says, can bring benefits if and only if it diminishes a limitation. So that's his opening line. Technology can bring benefits if and only if it diminishes a limitation. And then he says, if you agree with that, we're done. And you go, okay. And what he does then is he unpacks. So when I talk about technology here and when he talks about technology, it's the idea of applying knowledge to the world. Okay, so any technology, any innovation is a practical application of knowledge into the world. So we can do loads of research. Once that research hits the world, then it becomes technology. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. He says technology brings benefits if and only if it diminishes a limitation. And what the kind of implication is, if we don't use it to diminish a limitation, we're just taking on more and more stuff and getting no benefit. So what I read into this is this. We're really, really bad at adopting new technology. Okay? We collectively, we as humans, we as societies, are rubbish at adopting new technology. And in fact, actually, that's not true, because we love new technology. Who has bought a mobile phone in the last 2 years? Lots and lots of hands go up. We love toys. We love it all. The problem is we're really, really bad at benefiting from new technology. That's what we're rubbish at. We're rubbish at leveraging it. And so what I want to do with my little slot this morning is unpack some of that and maybe give you some thinking tools that will be useful, not just for the rest of the day, but going forwards as well. And it'd be great if we kind of talk about some of this in some of the breaks as well. So what Goldratt does is he says, essentially, there's 4 questions that he asks, or that he suggests that we ask ourselves when we're evaluating a new technology. And the first 2 are pretty straightforward. The second two are really quite challenging, is what I've found. So here's Goldratt's 4 questions then. The first question he asks is this. He says, what is the power of the technology? Right, what thing does it give us? What is the power? This is the easy one. This is read the sales brochure. Right? Listen to the person, listen to the fanboy or the fangirl saying, this is amazing, you should do this thing. Okay, that's the power of the new technology. What does it do for us? Why should I go and buy some? And then he says, right, remember, in order for it to benefit us, we need to understand the limitation. So what limitation does it diminish? What thing does it enable us to do that we couldn't do before, or what limitation does it remove that we had? Okay. Often, this isn't as obvious, because often that limitation is hiding in plain sight. Transport, right? When we first had trains, before we had trains, people would typically work within 3 miles of where they lived. That was a very common model. You would work within 3 miles that you lived. So you had a constraint. I'm only going to look for work within 3 miles of where I live, because that's where I can reasonably walk in the morning or come back in an evening. And then we develop public transport. Who lives within 3 miles of where they work? Okay, I'm going to say about less than 10% of you, I reckon. Who doesn't live? Who lives more than 3 miles away from the office? Yeah, most of the hands, okay. And who's just not going to put their hand up this morning? Because it's morning, yeah. Okay, so what limitation does it diminish? Sometimes that limitation is hiding in plain sight. This is where it gets interesting, okay. What rules enabled us to manage this limitation? We've been living with this limitation for arguably the whole of history so far, until this technology emerges. What rules have enabled us to live with that technology? And again, those rules are often hiding in plain sight. We don't realize those are rules, so we end up just getting constrained by them. We end up getting stuck in them. And once we understand what rules enabled us to manage that limitation, we need to unpack those rules and discard them. We need to say, well, then those rules are no longer valid. But now, what new rules are we going to need in order to exploit this new technology, exploit this new thing, okay? And it's often not the not of the question 3. So there's rules that are enabling us to manage this limitation. Okay, we can try and find those, and we can try and dismantle those. But the new rules we're going to need are often subtle and often emerge, and often we don't notice until we kind of fall off the edge. So I want to look at this one. Which rules enabled us? Okay, because people don't make up rules. Usually, people don't make up rules pathologically. Right? People make up rules in order to help us. I can teach you the mechanics of driving a car. Okay, that won't take terribly long. I then need to give you some rules. In the UK, drive on the left. You don't have to, right? But it's a lot less bangy if you do. Okay, and other people will be a lot less surprised if you do. Right? Cyclists, red lights. Right? I'm a cyclist. Yeah, red lights. They mean things. So those rules are designed to enable many people to share roads. If we didn't have those rules, I was in Mumbai last week. Has anyone driven or been driven in Mumbai? Yeah, or Bangalore, or yeah, in Indian cities. To a non-local driver, there aren't any rules. Okay. Bizarrely, people manage to mostly not die. Okay, but I couldn't figure out how. There's lots of bibbing, lots of swerving, and it looks like the cars are kind of dancing with each other on the road. Okay? What I did realize early on is that the lines on the road are purely decorative. What you have is an area of flat and a bunch of vehicles on it moving around each other. Okay? Also, there is no outside in terms of which side you overtake on. You overtake on the side that the gap is, or that the gap is going to be when you slam into it, or something. Anyway. But these rules that are designed to enable us, they inevitably end up constraining us, okay? So as the new technologies emerge, we get stuck in our old ways. So I want to look at a few examples that try to kind of explore some of this. So the first one I want to look at is ERP. Who was writing software in the 90s? Anyone writing software in the 90s? Oh, I love a room full of millennials. I was gestating in the 90s. What are you talking about? ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, these systems like SAP and PeopleSoft, which no longer exists, and JD Edwards, which most of them no longer exist. They've all been bought up and kind of squished into Oracle and SAP mostly. So ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning systems. Oh, let's see what happens if Now that's not me, because I'm still sending out a signal, if anyone's on AV. Unplugged, try switching it off and on again. There we go, and yeah, Thank you. Switch it off and on again. Universal switch. I have no idea what resolution that is, but it's resolution squiggly. Okay, so ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning. So the idea before ERP was that you had a whole bunch of as organizations grew, and they ended up with like thousands of people, they became too big for you to really see what was going on. So what ERP gave us, the big thing that ERP gave us, and like nowadays we don't even think about it. It's become so pervasive we don't think about it. What ERP gave us was data. Okay, in an organization, I didn't know what was going on. If I had a large enough organization, you had an engineering function, a manufacturing function, a sales function, a marketing function, an operations function, an HR function, finance, all these different parts that come together, distribution, fulfillment, to build and deliver a product, basically didn't know what each other was doing. It was too big of an organization. You could find out, but you would probably find out quarterly. By the time you roll up all of that information about what's where, it becomes a very big, complicated problem. So what ERP gave us was a big hole to dump all of that information into, and you could now start asking it questions. And we think nothing of sticking loads and loads of data in a database and asking it questions now. That's just a normal thing to do. Or a data lake, which is like a database but on the West Coast. So actually, I have a client that's just set up their first data lake, and they're going into bat with 20 petabytes of data. My eyes started bleeding. I don't even know how to process that. But no, so back in the 90s, so this is getting some data together. First time this has happened, and now suddenly senior people in an organization could say things like, how much inventory do I have? How many sales am I making per day? Right? I can get real-time data coming out of these things. So ERP was a game-changing technology. I saw many, many, many organizations adopt SAP, Barn, a whole bunch of these different systems during the 90s, early 2000s. And what would tend to happen is they would engage with a vendor, hand over typically tens of millions of dollars, right? I mean, this is not trivial stuff. Typically kit out a new data center full of servers to run these things, have armies of consultants all over the organization for well over a year, maybe a couple of years, trying to integrate everything into this ERP, and they would have nothing to show for it. Wow, what a really expensive thing to do. And so let's have a look at this. Let's apply these questions then to ERP. So what is the power of ERP? What do the sales people say? What do the brochures say? Well, they say, you can do this. You can collect and analyze data, information, right across the organization. You couldn't do that before. Okay? So what limitation does that diminish? It diminishes ignorance of what other divisions are doing. If I don't know what other divisions are doing, I have to make local decisions. I have to do the best thing I can. And so once I can see across the organization, I can maybe make different decisions. But right then, the limitation it diminishes is the tunnel vision, right? Is the siloedness. So what rules enabled us to cope with the fact that we couldn't see across the organization? Well, the main one was this idea of cost accounting. So cost accounting started in the 1950s, thereabouts. And the idea is that you have the organizations broken up into a bunch of divisions, and those divisions are either a cost center or a profit center. Okay? If you're a profit center, you've got to go out and make sales, and you have sales targets and all those kind of things and commissions. If you're a cost center, you've just got to drive down cost. Guess what software engineering is? A cost center. Everyone in this room is a cost center, unless you're out there selling, in which case you're a profit center. Okay? And so cost accounting says this. It says, we care about sweating our assets. I'm talking to a room full of assets here. So in other words, what I need to do is keep all my people busy. I've got a room full of expensive people. I hope you're expensive. You should be expensive. Okay? And so in order to maximize the value from my expensive people, I need to keep them fully loaded. So that's one of the things I need to do. So I have, who does timesheets? And project codes and cost codes and cross-coding and all that wooden dollars nonsense. Yeah, that's cost accounting. Okay? Who has an annual budget cycle where you take programs up to a board and you try and get funding for those? Yeah, that's all cost accounting. And that was what we did. And that's what a lot of organizations still do. And we need cost accounting to run our division. That's the rule that we believe is true. So if we unpack cost accounting, what could we replace it with in order to exploit this information that we now know about the organization? Well, back to Goldratt again. He coined the phrase throughput accounting. So throughput accounting says we don't care about the individual silos in the organization. What we care about is the flow of value through the organization. So there aren't cost centers. There aren't profit centers. There's just value creation. Okay? So it's holistic. Everyone's involved in creating value. So the fact that the salesperson is taking money is no more interesting than the fact that smoke comes out the tailpipe of your car. The tailpipe didn't create the smoke, it's just where the smoke emerges. Right? The salespeople didn't create the value, that's just where the money changes hands. Okay? And so it's a more holistic view. The problem is this, though. Those rules become entrenched, and those rules become law. If you are a publicly listed company, every quarter you have to publish a bunch of numbers, a bunch of financial numbers. These are cost accounting numbers. They're called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP. So you have to publish your EBITDA, which is earnings before income tax, and you're already asleep, right? There's about 15 of these numbers, and they come out in a quarterly report. And the idea is, and it kind of makes sense, right, create a level playing field. If I want to invest in two companies, and I've got Konstantin's company, and I've got Seb's company, and I want to see how they're doing, then I look at their numbers, and I compare them, and I go, oh, now look at that. Earnings per share in Konstantin's company is doing pretty well. I'm very happy about that. So they become law. Okay, let's bring this a little bit more up to date. Let's take a look at a slightly familiar technology. Okay, Cucumber. What is the power of Cucumber? What is Cucumber about? Well, let's see. So BDD starts back in the day. BDD plus JUnit equals RSpec or something like that. Okay, I want some way of automating code examples in the small. I'm starting to think about how I would automate scenarios and stories in the same way. So I use RSpec to build a thing called a story runner. And then Aslak decides to rewrite my story runner with a proper grammar, with plain text processor, just a much, much nicer solution to my kind of first iteration. And that was Cucumber. So what's the power of Cucumber then? What does it do? Again, go ask these guys. Look at the website, right? What I think the power of it is that the whole team can drive scenarios using plain text specification. That's new. We couldn't do that before. Okay? Before, we certainly wouldn't use plain text to drive anything, and also the whole team wouldn't do it. So what is the limitation that this diminishes then? Well, it diminishes handoffs between silos of responsibility. Even within a small team, you still have handoffs. You have handoffs from analysis to development, from development to testing. You have this little mini thing going on even inside a feature. Okay, so what are the rules? What are the rules that enable us to manage the limitation where analysts can't code Java or really make sense of Java code? Well, so the first thing is we say analysts must hand off requirements to programmers to automate. That's one of our rules. Okay, that's a thing that we do, and we have ceremony around that and backlog grooming and all that shenanigans. And then we have another rule, which is that programmers must hand off code to testers for checking. Okay? And you'll notice testing doesn't appear in this anywhere because testing is a different thing. Testing is not about BDD. BDD is about delivering software. Testing is about a whole bunch of other stuff that we could spend all morning talking about. But these are the rules, okay? So these are the rules that we need to unpack now. So what new rules would we need? Well, the new rule we'd need is something like this. The team is going to work together to define, automate, and check all the scenarios. It's a whole team sport, okay? And so some of the tells here are that we have different definitions of done for analysis. We call it ready for definition of ready. We have a definition of done for development, definition of done for testing. I saw someone out there with a T-shirt that said something like definition of done, is it live yet? Right? That's my definition of done. Yeah? And so what happens now? Rules become culture. That's what happens. So those rules that were enabling us become how we do things. Okay? And so Cucumber isn't just a tool, it's a countercultural statement, which I quite like. Yeah? And that's why you see it so often in the world being used as a test automation thing. I don't want to change my culture, I just want to drop in a tool that I've heard is cool. And, by the way, free. Right? Comes with consulting. Right? And so rules become culture, okay? So what we end up with now is we create these mini waterfalls within each sprint or within each iteration, or even if you're doing one-piece flow, within a feature, you still get mini waterfalls, okay? So we want to try and go against that. So let's take a look at one more example then. Behavior-driven development. So what is BDD about? BDD is about 15 years old. BDD is about trying to get a whole team to figure out how to deliver the right software, okay? And that's a hard challenge. Kent Beck, when he first proposed TDD, said, I'm just trying to get business people and technical people to talk to each other. And I still, 15 years later, say that BDD is about getting business people and technical people to talk to each other. It's a really hard problem, okay? It's a socio-technical problem. It's one of my favorite new phrases. So let's apply these questions to BDD then. So what is the power of BDD? What does it give you? Okay, well, there's lots and lots of stuff out there to tell you about this. My one-line summary is this. The whole team can focus on delivering software that matters. That's the power it gives you. That's the new thing. So what does that mean? Well, before that, the various members of the team would be fragmented anyway. And also, we wouldn't really have a sense of what software that matters meant because we weren't working outside in. We weren't working, starting with the required behavior and working backwards from a pull system until we get just the code we need to deliver that behavior. Okay, so that's the power of this new technology. So what does it diminish then? What limitation does it diminish? There's lots and lots of things, but I think the two that are most useful in this context are this. It diminishes speculative features, so the massive requirement specification, and the consequent over-engineering, okay, that goes with that. So it means that analysts and product managers and product people can stay more focused on what they're trying to do, and engineers, developers can stay more focused on what they're trying to deliver. So what rules enabled us to live in a world where that wasn't true? Well, there's a couple of rules. The first rule was this: requirements have to be comprehensive and unambiguous. And we will spend enough time doing that until they are. Yeah? And we'll have meetings about it and workshops and all kinds of stuff. And on the technology side, the solution must be flexible and extensible. They're two of my least favorite words. Okay? The way to make software flexible and extensible is to write as little of it as you possibly can, because then I can do stuff with it. Okay? J2EE was flexible and extensible. That's all I'm saying. So let's assume then we could stay focused. What new rules would enable us to exploit this new technology? Well, we'd need to say things like this. We'd need to say we're going to iterate quickly so we can provide valuable feedback. That would be a new rule. Okay? And that implies that we want to work in small chunks, because if you work in big chunks, you can't iterate quickly. Okay? And it implies that you want to focus on flow and removing impediments. We're not stating that, it's just kind of, that gets pulled in. And the other thing, which is deliberate discovery, is we're going to assume we're wrong. Assume we're wrong, but assume we can learn and adapt. Whereas the old paradigm, the old model, is we need to assume we're right. We need to do enough work to believe we're right. We can go in assuming we're wrong. It's wonderfully liberating. And now rules become paradigm. Paradigm is hard. Shifting a paradigm is a really, really unpleasant experience. Okay? So Neo, when he gets sucked out of the Matrix and he wakes up all spluttering, he just had his paradigm shifted. Okay? He thought he was in a world full of stuff and nice steaks and whatever, and he realizes he's a battery on a battery farm. Oh no, I've just ruined it for you. Sorry. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That's the Wizard of Oz. And so he's had his paradigm. He has to readjust to the fact that everything he thought was true is no longer true. That's a paradigm shift. Goldratt talks about, he says there's three things that you need, three criteria for a paradigm shift. The first is you need existential threat. You need a fear of absolute annihilation, right? You need to believe the world is going to end. The second thing you need is to have run out of options. You need to have tried everything else and be desperate enough to try my crazy thing. And the third thing you need is information. And he says, I'm good for that one. So what I do is I make friends with organizations and wait for the first two. And that was his consulting model. So sometimes it took 15 years, but that's okay. He's got plenty of time. And so when you start thinking about paradigm shift, you really are tilting people 90 degrees. You know, the cost accounting to throughput accounting shift is you're taking people with maybe 20, 25, 30 years experience of that previous paradigm and saying, everything you know about risk is true, Everything you know about the domain is true. Everything you thought you knew about managing that risk is completely bogus. Right? Wake up, it was all a matrix. And they go, oh no! And often they just go, I'm going to lock in. I don't want to listen to this. Okay? So paradigm shift is hard. Culture change can be a lever for that. So Cucumber can be a lever for that paradigm shift to behavior-driven development. Okay? So what does that mean? That means the rules are holding us back. Okay? The rules are holding us back in terms of law, in terms of culture, in terms of paradigm. So what are we going to do then? How can we break the rules? It turns out it's surprisingly easy to learn how to break the rules. The hard bit is applying it. So I'll tell you how to break the rules. What we do is we take each of Goldratt's 4 questions and we invert them and we make them into a statement. So he says, what is the power of this new technology? Well, the first thing we want to do is understand the power of that new technology. Okay? What does it do? How does it work? Yeah, so really get under its skin. And how can we exploit it? Like, does it apply to us? Then we want to recognize the limitation of the technology. So say, what limitation will it diminish? Well, let's go and answer that question. Okay? How could we prove that that limitation applies in our context? If it doesn't, we should do something else. We should ignore that. We should let it go past. If you don't have that limitation, this technology will buy you nothing. Okay? And you'll have all the cost of adopting it. So how could you prove that limitation is holding you back and measure it? How would you know whether it was diminishing? How would you know whether this technology was working for you? And again, let's think about these. What rules are limiting us? That's what we need to do next. We need to identify the rules that are limiting us. Identify the rules that are holding us back. Be aware they may be hiding in plain sight. Okay? How are they going to get in the way of adopting this new technology? What assumptions are they making that we need to challenge? And there's a human element to this as well, because a lot of people will have built their careers, their status, their identity, their empires around that set of rules. Right? Ask any auditor, ask any accountant about what they understand about cost accounting when you start pulling all that stuff away. So how can we make it safe to change? And how can we create what I call a graceful exit? How can you make it so that those people can now transition into a new world and still bring all of their knowledge and all of their experience and all of that wealth with them? Rather than saying, okay, and I've heard famous Scrum people say this, anyone who's a project manager or a business analyst, you no longer have a job here. Like, way to make friends. Yeah? Don't do that. And then finally, we want to identify and implement the new rules. Okay? This is fun. This is where the fun happens with the new technology. And I see there's 2 stages to this. One is, how do we safely exploit this new technology? How do we make it so that we can use this technology and it won't break things? So that's the first bit, is how do we safely adopt it? And then once we've got it safely adopted, how do we then really, really make it sing, right? So how do we introduce these ideas and institutionalize them? How do we make them the new normal? And so this is my challenge to you. So all the things you hear today and all the things you hear going forward, what is the power of that thing you're hearing? What limitations does it diminish? What rules, because we're not doing that thing yet, probably, what rules do we currently have? What constraints? They might be legal, they might be policy, they might be cultural, they might be structural, they might be we're stuck in that paradigm that are going to allow us to manage within that limitation, and therefore, how can we break those rules? Remember, technology can bring benefits if and only if it diminishes a limitation. So, go break some rules. Thank you.